I messaged the family group chat, "I'm receiving an award tonight. It would mean a lot if you came. My name is Rylan. I'm 27, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the background character in my own family's story. I'm the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who never causes trouble, but also never seems to deserve any recognition. My parents and my younger brother Blake always had this way of orbiting around each other, loud, demanding, and constantly expecting me to just accept whatever role they assigned me. I used to tell myself I didn't mind, that being overlooked meant I could avoid the drama. But the truth is, being invisible in your own home eats away at you until it's all you think about. Blake was always the golden child. He's 2 years younger, but from the moment he picked up a basketball, he was the star. My parents went to every one of his games at Lincoln High, screamed from the bleachers, hosted barbecue parties for his achievements. When I came home with honor roll certificates, they'd nod and say, "That's expected." When Blake scored 15 points, even if his team lost, it was like Christmas morning. Birthdays were the same torture. His would be a parade of balloons, chocolate cake from Sullivan's Bakery, expensive Nike gear. Mine were usually dinner at Olive Garden and maybe a sweater from Target I didn't want. It wasn't the lack of things that hurt. It was the message that my efforts were ordinary while his were extraordinary. I tried to play it off. I tried to be supportive. I didn't want to be the jealous brother. But inside, I carried this quiet ache every time they brushed me aside for Blake's latest highlight reel. Still, I kept pushing myself through college at Northwestern, through internships at tech startups, through sleepless nights working on projects that no one in my family ever asked about. While Blake partied his way through community college, I was grinding. And even though they didn't see it, I knew deep down that one day it would matter. That day came when I got nominated for the Johnson Innovation Award in my field. It wasn't some small recognition either. It was the kind of award that could change the trajectory of my career. Months of hard work, late nights, and sacrifices had led to this moment. For once, something big had my name on it, and I wanted my family to be there. Against my better judgment, I reached for my phone and typed a message into our family group chat. "I'm receiving an award tonight. It would mean a lot if you came." I hesitated before pressing send, part of me already knowing how this might play out, but still hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. It was Blake. "We're going to see Imagine Dragons instead," he wrote. Just like that. No hesitation, no consideration, not even a question about what kind of award it was. A concert. Some band he probably wouldn't even remember in a month. What I didn't know was that this moment would change everything. And by the end of that night, they'd have no choice but to see me. Before I could even process the sting of Blake's response, my mom chimed in, "Don't guilt us," she typed, like my request was some kind of burden, like I was asking them to choose between breathing and suffocating. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I felt this wave of heat crawl up my neck. I wanted to scream, to demand why it was always like this, why I never mattered. But instead I just typed back 2 words, "All right." And I meant it. Not in the way they thought. Not in the way that meant I'd accept being sidelined again. Something inside me shifted in that moment. I wasn't a kid anymore waiting for their approval. I wasn't desperate for their claps or their cheers. The pattern had been there since childhood. I still remember a Christmas when I was 15. I'd saved up my allowance and part-time job money from working at Best Buy to buy Dad a nice Fossil watch, something I knew he'd been eyeing at the mall. When he opened it, he smiled politely, said, "Thanks, son," and set it aside. Later that night, Blake gave him a cheap keychain from a gas station with a basketball charm. Dad laughed, clipped it onto his keys, and said, "Now this is special." Everyone clapped and teased Blake for being thoughtful. I sat there quietly, holding back the sting in my throat. The pattern only got worse as we got older. Blake wrecked his Honda Civic once after a night out with friends. My parents rushed to comfort him, bought him a newer Toyota Camry, and said, "Don't be too hard on yourself. Mistakes happen." When my car broke down from wear and tear because I couldn't afford a replacement, Dad shook his head and said, "You should have planned better, Rylan." No sympathy, no help, just disappointment. And yet I kept hoping. Hoping that one day they'd see me. That one day they'd sit in the audience clapping until their hands stung, smiling like they were proud of me. That's why the award mattered. It wasn't just recognition from strangers. It was proof that my life, my choices, my hard work had value. Proof that I wasn't the shadow they made me out to be. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized they didn't want to see it. It wasn't that they couldn't, it was that they wouldn't. Blake's glow was easier to bask in. He was loud, charismatic, messy in a way they could excuse. I was quiet, steady, a reminder of responsibility they didn't want to acknowledge. That week leading up to the ceremony, I tried testing the waters. I mentioned the nomination to Mom during our Sunday call. She hummed distractedly, then asked if I'd seen Blake's new haircut on Instagram. I told Dad the award was from the National Technology Foundation. He nodded and said, "That's good, but have you thought about maybe moving back to Chicago? Blake could use your help with some bills." The final straw came when I visited home a month earlier. I walked into the living room to find the mantel covered in Blake's trophies, medals, framed photos from basketball tournaments, birthdays, random milestones. My own graduation photo from Northwestern wasn't there anymore. I asked Mom about it and she just said, "Oh, we had to make room. It's in the drawer." The drawer. Like my entire existence could be tucked away, forgotten. Little did they know, by the end of that night, the whole country would know my name, whether they wanted to acknowledge me or not. So when I saw their responses in the group chat that night, I realized I had been clinging to a fantasy. They weren't coming. They never would. The ceremony wasn't for them. It was for me. And yet, some bitter part of me wanted them to see. Not just hear about it later. Not just brush it off when I mentioned it months down the road, but see it live with no way to escape. The cab pulled up to the Marriott Grand Ballroom downtown, and I stepped out into a wash of light and noise. Reporters stood by the doors, cameras flashing as nominees walked the red carpet. My stomach lurched. This was real. This was my moment. As I walked forward, adjusting my tie, I could almost hear Blake's voice mocking me, "Don't guilt us." I could hear Mom saying, "We're busy." And beneath it all, Dad's dismissive shrug. But that familiar sting wasn't there anymore. Something else was stirring inside me, a mix of anger, pride, and a quiet plan forming in the back of my mind. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I wasn't going to let this be just another moment they ignored. This time they wouldn't get to look away. What I didn't know until I arrived was that the organizers had a surprise in store. The Johnson Innovation Awards weren't just being broadcast on local Chicago TV. They were airing nationally on CNN. My name, my face, my story, all of it was about to be spotlighted far beyond what I'd imagined. I smiled to myself, though the ache in my chest was still there. For years, I'd been pushed aside, minimized, treated like I didn't matter. Tonight, all of that would change. Not because they wanted it to, but because they wouldn't have a choice. As I stood in line waiting to check in, I pulled out my phone one more time. I stared at the family group chat, at Blake's photo from outside the United Center, at Mom's heart reaction, at Dad's encouraging words for his favorite son. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to send them one last message, a final chance, something simple like, "It's being televised nationally." But then I stopped. No. Let them find out the way the rest of the country would. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, straightened my shoulders, and walked inside. The ceremony had this surreal energy, almost dreamlike. I'd been to corporate events before, but nothing like this. Cameras sweeping across the crowd, flashes of light, people in sharp suits and elegant dresses, everyone buzzing with anticipation. As I checked in, they handed me a small envelope with my seat number and a badge with my name in bold letters, Rylan Mitchell, nominee. I turned it over in my hands, letting the weight of it sink in. I should have felt pure excitement, but something gnawed at me. That gnawing turned into a sharp twist when I glanced at my phone again just before the ceremony started. The family group chat lit up with notifications. Blake had posted a string of pictures from outside the concert venue, him beaming with his arm around his buddies holding craft beer bottles. Another photo of the stage lights. Another of him posing with some roadie he probably begged for a selfie with. He captioned one, "Best night of my life." But they had no idea that across town, I was about to have the night that would change all our lives forever. I scrolled further through the family chat, my jaw tightening with each message. Mom had commented, "So proud of you, sweetheart," followed by clapping emojis. Dad added, "You earned this, son." Nothing like making memories. That was the moment. That was the knife. Not just the fact that they didn't show up for me, but that they were celebrating Blake's night like it was some grand accomplishment. Here I sat in my tailored suit with months of effort about to culminate in one of the most important nights of my life, and my own parents couldn't be bothered to notice. Worse, they were spending their words of pride on him, on a random concert, on something fleeting. My chest tightened. I thought back to every little slight. Every moment I'd brushed off. My graduation picture stuffed in a drawer. The cheap keychain treated like a treasure while my carefully chosen gift was ignored. The time I told Dad I'd landed my first job at Google, and he barely looked up from ESPN before asking if Blake needed help with his car payment. I'd swallowed all of it quietly because I thought maybe someday it would be different. But staring at those messages, I realized the truth. It was never going to be different. The ceremony began. Lights dimming, music swelling from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. My thoughts should have been on the stage, on the speeches, on the possibility of hearing my name called, but all I could see was that group chat. My brother's grin, my parents' applause. Not for me but for him. I felt my hands tremble slightly as I set the phone face down on my leg. I took a breath, but it didn't calm me. The sting turned into a burn, and the burn into something sharper. The death of my trust in them. What little I had left was gone. Something inside me shifted that night, hard and permanent. I wasn't just disappointed anymore. I was done. When they called my name, yes, my name, I walked onto that stage and accepted the award with steady hands and a clear voice, but I barely heard myself speak. I remember flashes, the blinding lights, the weight of the crystal trophy in my hand, the crowd rising in a standing ovation. I must have said something coherent because later people congratulated me on how inspiring my words had been. But in that moment, my mind was stuck somewhere else. It wasn't on the applause in front of me. It was on the silence behind me, the absence of the only people who should have been there. As I stood there holding that award, a piece of me broke off like a rope finally snapping after years of strain. The little boy who wanted his parents to say, "We're proud of you," died quietly on that stage. The night ended in celebration. There were photos with industry leaders, interviews with Tech Weekly, new connections that would change my career trajectory. Everyone around me was smiling, shaking my hand, telling me I had a bright future ahead. And yet, when I got back to my apartment in River North, the walls felt colder than ever. I set the award on my desk and just stared at it. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like ashes in my mouth. I opened my phone. Of course, the family chat was still buzzing. Blake had posted more concert videos, my parents gushing over them. Dad writing, "Wish we could do nights like this more often." I scrolled and scrolled, waiting to see even a passing mention of me. A question about how my night went. A simple good luck message sent hours earlier. There was nothing. Not a word. That silence would be the last time they could ignore me. Because what was coming next would make sure the whole world knew my story, including them. The weeks following that award ceremony became a turning point in ways I couldn't have imagined. Success has this strange momentum. Once it starts rolling, it picks up speed and brings opportunities you never saw coming. The recognition from the Johnson Innovation Award opened doors I'd only dreamed about. Companies that had never heard of me were suddenly reaching out. Silicon Valley startups wanted consultations. Major tech publications asked for interviews. I found myself on panels alongside people whose TED Talks I'd watched in college. At first, I felt like an imposter. Like maybe I didn't belong in these conversations. But slowly, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to believe. I had earned all of it. I took on projects that terrified me, projects I would have once avoided because I was afraid of failing and hearing my family say, "See, you're not cut out for this." But without their voices in my ear, I felt lighter, freer. And when I succeeded, it wasn't just a professional win. It was proof to myself that I didn't need their approval to be great. My life began transforming in ways they couldn't imagine. I moved from my cramped studio in Lincoln Park to a sleek high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, a view that stretched to the horizon. I started dressing differently, sharper suits from Hugo Boss instead of off-the-rack from Men's Warehouse. Clothes that reflected the man I was becoming instead of the quiet shadow I used to be. My confidence grew and people noticed. Strangers at networking events gravitated toward me. Colleagues looked to me for leadership. Even the mentors I once looked up to started treating me as an equal. Meanwhile, my family's world stayed exactly the same. Blake was still the center of their attention, still posting photos of pickup games at the local rec center and nights out at sports bars in Schaumburg. Mom and Dad cheered him on with the same tired enthusiasm, as if his every move was groundbreaking. But from my new vantage point, it looked different. For the first time, I saw it clearly, not as a reflection of my inadequacy, but as a reflection of their limitations. They didn't know how to value anything outside of the easy, familiar glow Blake provided. I stopped craving their attention. In its place, I started to enjoy a new kind of power, invisibility by choice. They didn't ask about my life, so I didn't offer details. When Mom called during her Sunday routine, I kept the conversations polite but short. When Dad asked if I could help your brother out financially because Blake was behind on rent again, I simply said, "I can't," and left it at that. For once, I didn't bend myself into knots trying to justify my boundaries. I didn't over-explain, didn't apologize. I just let the silence hang. They didn't push much. I think they assumed I was still quietly plodding along, the same dependable Rylan who would always be there when they needed something. They had no idea how much had changed. And part of me took quiet satisfaction in that I was building something so much bigger than they could comprehend right under their noses. Within a year, I wasn't just respected in my field. I was becoming a name people recognized. Invitations to speak at conferences rolled in. Articles were written about my work in Wired and Fast Company. I even got invited to sit on panels alongside people I'd once studied in textbooks. Every time I saw my name in print, every time a microphone was handed to me, I felt the weight of years of invisibility lifting. But the real moment, the one that would change everything, was still coming. And when it arrived, they wouldn't just have to acknowledge me. They'd have to face what they'd done. The turning point came when I received an invitation that made my hands shake as I read it. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with embossed lettering that caught the light. Inside was an invitation to the National Innovation Gala, not just as an attendee, but as the recipient of their Lifetime Achievement Award. Lifetime Achievement. At 27. The irony wasn't lost on me. This wasn't just another industry event. This was the kind of platform that could cement me in the public eye permanently. The gala was broadcast live on major networks, watched by millions of Americans. It was the kind of spotlight so wide and so bright that even people who had spent their entire lives refusing to look at me would have no choice but to see. But the real setup for what was to come didn't happen on the night of the gala itself. It began months earlier when my opportunities snowballed into something larger than I could have imagined. One of the companies I'd partnered with after my first big recognition was a media conglomerate with connections across television, print, and digital platforms. At first, it was just collaboration. I'd contribute to their projects, provide expertise, and they'd give me visibility. But as time went on, they became interested in more than just my work. They were interested in me. My story, my perspective, my ability to connect with audiences. I remember sitting in their glass-walled office overlooking Michigan Avenue one afternoon when one of the executives leaned forward and said, "Rylan, people don't just respect your work. They relate to you. That's rare. Have you thought about what you could do with a bigger platform?" That sentence stuck with me. A bigger platform. Not just recognition within my field, but something beyond it. Something public, visible. Over the following months, I started accepting more interviews. Podcasts, magazines, panels on Bloomberg and CNBC. At first, I kept my answers strictly professional, talking about innovation, technology, market trends. But slowly I began to open up. I spoke about resilience, about being underestimated, about working in silence when no one believes in you. I didn't name my family, of course. But I didn't need to. The message resonated on its own. The response shocked me. My inbox flooded with messages. I felt invisible too. Thank you for saying what so many of us have lived. You gave me hope. It was humbling, but it was also clarifying. I wasn't just rising for myself anymore. My story was giving voice to others who'd lived in the shadows. Then came the meeting that changed everything. The organizers of the National Innovation Gala invited me not only to attend, but to be featured prominently. They wanted to spotlight my journey as part of the televised broadcast. Not just my professional achievements, but my personal story. "We think people need to hear it," the director said, leaning across the mahogany conference table. "Your story represents something powerful about the American dream, about perseverance." My chest tightened. For a moment, I pictured Blake, my parents, sitting at home in their familiar living room, maybe flipping through channels and stumbling across me on their TV screen. Hearing my story not as a family member they could dismiss, but as a narrative presented to the entire nation. I agreed, of course. But inside I realized what this meant. The setup was complete. All the years of being minimized, all the invisible wounds, all the swallowed words, they were about to be spoken aloud, framed in a way that no one could ignore. The irony was almost too perfect. My family had accused me of guilting them for asking to be seen. Now they were going to hear my truth whether they wanted to or not, delivered not in a private plea they could brush off, but in a broadcast they couldn't escape. And though I didn't know exactly how they'd react, I knew one thing for certain. By the end of that night, the balance of power between us would never be the same. The night of the National Innovation Gala arrived with the kind of weight that presses against your ribs. I stood in front of the mirror in my suite at the Palmer House Hilton, adjusting the cuffs of my midnight blue Tom Ford suit. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was dressing up to impress anyone. Not my parents, not Blake, not even the audience I was about to face. I was doing this for me. And in a way, for that younger version of me who had sat silently at dinner tables while everyone else praised Blake's latest achievement. The venue was dazzling, A cathedral of lights and velvet at the Chicago Cultural Center. Cameras perched like hawks, waiting to swoop. As I walked the red carpet, reporters leaned forward with their microphones calling my name. I answered calmly, confidently, never once letting on that my mind was somewhere else. Half on the stage I was about to step onto, half on the living room I imagined back in Naperville. I could see it in my mind, the TV flickering, my parents settling into their worn leather couch after their long day. Blake sprawled with his phone in hand, all of them expecting another ordinary Tuesday evening. And then my face would fill the screen. When my moment finally came, the announcer's voice boomed across the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient, Rylan Mitchell. The applause rose like a wave as I stepped onto the stage. My shoes clicked against the polished floor, each step heavier than the last, like I was walking not just into the spotlight, but into a reckoning. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was steady, clear. Thank you, I began, pausing to let the room settle. This award means more to me than recognition of my work. It represents something deeper, what it means to be seen. Truly seen after years of being invisible. A hush fell over the audience. My words weren't technical jargon about my field. They were personal, deliberate. I grew up in a family where attention was selective, where achievements were compared, measured, and often dismissed. For years I believed I wasn't enough, that no matter how hard I worked, it would never be worthy of applause. I thought invisibility was my fate. I let that hang in the air. I didn't name Blake, didn't mention my parents directly, but the weight of my story filled the room. But invisibility can be a powerful teacher. It forces you to work in silence, to grow roots deep enough to hold when no one is watching. It teaches you resilience. And when the moment comes, when the light finally does find you, you're ready to stand tall in it. The crowd shifted. Some nodded, others leaned forward. I could feel them connecting. I stand here tonight not just because of what I've done, but because of what I've endured. To anyone who has ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told they didn't deserve to be seen, I want you to know, you do. You always did. And your moment will come. Applause broke out, swelling like thunder. Cameras flashed, but in my mind, I wasn't hearing the audience in front of me. I was picturing the silence back home, the stunned expressions, the tightening jaws, the realization that the son and brother they'd ignored was now speaking not just to them, but to an entire nation. My phone exploded that night. Messages poured in from colleagues, strangers, people who'd watched the broadcast. But among the dozens of notifications, 3 stood out from the family group chat. First, Mom, Rylan, why didn't you tell us it was such a big event? Not, we're proud of you. Not, we're sorry we missed it. Just the same deflection, the same refusal to take responsibility. Then Dad, you made us sound like terrible parents on live television. Do you realize what people will think? Even now, their first instinct was to worry about appearances, about how they were perceived, not about what they had done. Finally, Blake, wow bro. A little dramatic, don't you think? You made it sound like we ignored you your whole life. Chill. It's not that deep. That was the moment, the final nail. I felt a clarity wash over me so sharp it was almost peaceful. They hadn't changed. They never would. And I didn't need them to. I didn't reply to the group chat. Instead, I typed 3 separate messages. To Mom, I spent years begging to be noticed. Last night I finally was. You had your chance. To Dad, you're right. People will think you were terrible parents. That's because you were. And to Blake, it was that deep. It always was. You just never had to feel it. Then I muted the chat and set the phone down. Word spread quickly after the gala. Relatives who'd barely spoken to me before reached out, congratulating me, telling me how proud they were. Old teachers from high school emailed saying they'd watched me on TV. Even neighbors sent notes saying they had no idea I'd accomplished so much. My parents couldn't escape it. Their friends saw the broadcast. Their coworkers mentioned it. Even people at their church brought it up. Everywhere they turned, my success was visible, undeniable. The son they dismissed had become the story they couldn't avoid. One evening, months later, I walked into my apartment after another speaking engagement and set a second award on the shelf beside the first. The city lights shimmered through my floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the trophies, bathing the room in gold. For a moment, I thought of that drawer back home, the one where Mom had stuffed my graduation photo to make space for Blake's trophies. I smiled. My achievements weren't in a drawer anymore. They were out in the open, on display for anyone to see. And the people who had once shoved me into the shadows were left blinking in the light, too late to shield their eyes. That was my revenge. Not shouting, not vengeance in the traditional sense, but living so fully, so visibly, that their years of neglect became their legacy, not mine. I poured myself a glass of wine, stood by the window overlooking the Chicago skyline, and let the quiet of the city night settle around me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone to clap. I had finally stepped out of their shadow, and into my own light.